The man who sits at the president's desk has more power than almost any other individual on earth.
A focal point of power.
Position of dominance in the government.
For he is the freely chosen leader of the American people.
This is what you're taught about the presidency. A chief executive with complete command of a vast government. The single most powerful person in Washington. The story is a distraction. It's not how your government works anymore. The president isn't really the president. His orders can be defied without consequence. You just saw it happen. March 2020, a novel virus invades the country, and we shut down. Our society undergoes radical restructuring. The sitting president notices the costs of our response.
When you do these shutdowns, there's a lot of harm done on the other side.
He notices the shuttered schools, the incinerated livelihoods, the many brains broken by sustained isolation. And he turns against the shutdowns.
We're not doing any more shutdowns. We did the shutdown, and now we're doing the opening, and there won't be any more shutdowns.
And yet, the official policy coming from his own White House continues to tell the country to shut down. How is that possible?
People don't understand actually whose responsibility things were. It should frighten American citizens to know who was actually in charge.
This is the untold story of subterranean power. How a career bureaucrat seized control and engineered a disaster.
And she was proven incompetent and wrong on every single level, period.
There was a chief engineer of this misery, and it wasn't Anthony Fauci. This is how a president was toppled without a shot fired. December 2019. A new killer virus emerges from the East. The World Health Organization provides the first official estimate of the disease's deadliness, a 3% infection fatality rate, meaning this strange new virus supposedly kills 3 out of every 100 people who get it. That's a biblical body count. And now it's coming for Americans.
This is a global pandemic, and we are marshaling the full power of the federal government.
The president starts hosting daily press briefings.
We have a problem that a month ago nobody ever thought about.
He comforts the public.
We're going to all be great. We're going to be so good. Relax. We're doing great.
He scorns the Chinese.
It comes from China. It comes from China. I want to be accurate. Yeah, please.
And then, on April 24th, he decides to offer up some amateur public health guidance.
If there's any way that you can apply light and heat to cure. Deborah, have you ever heard of that?
I've not seen heat or light.
I think it's a great thing to look at.
Dr. Deborah Birx trying to not acknowledge what the president is saying.
It is so beyond parody.
Where is he getting these ideas from?
And I did a stanky little face.
And this is how the world meets Deborah Birx. This is probably what you remember of her, if you remember her at all. Deborah Birx spent her career in the medical wing of the U.S. Army, working as a lab scientist before moving into management of public health programs. The apex of her career is overseeing PEPFAR. This is America's apparatus for fighting AIDS in Africa. At PEPFAR, Birx works with Yen Pottinger, who's the wife of Matthew Pottinger. Matt Pottinger goes on to serve in the Trump administration. When COVID hits, the White House establishes a special COVID task force. It's run by Vice President Mike Pence, who scrambles to find a public health expert to serve on it. Pottinger recommends Birx. And on February 2020, Dr. Deborah Birx officially joins the White House COVID task force.
And I'm grateful that Dr. Deborah Birx will be on our team. And even on her first day, she's already been contributing significantly.
She's the coordinator, meaning she, and she alone, writes its medical advice. Just 1 month earlier, the State Department had released a vast investigation into Birx's management of PEPFAR. It's stuffed full of complaints. People describe her as dictatorial. They say her decisions are made without clear rationale other than, "I told you to." They say she does not listen to feedback and simply issues threats, and that she sets targets that are not reasonable and draw conclusions that lead down the wrong path.
Dr. Birx is a highly respected person I've gotten to know very well over the last 6 days.
Her first task on the task force is formulating the official White House COVID guidelines, which tell state governors how to fight this virus.
Every mayor and every governor should be instituting these guidelines.
And so, history turns to Dr. Birx. What comes out of her brain? She simply reuses the playbook she'd run to fight AIDS.
She was falling back on her experience and basically telling the room, no one else has had the experience I've had because I've been leading PEPFAR for AIDS in Africa.
So first, treat every case as a killer. AIDS has a sky-high fatality rate for anyone who contracts it. Birx assumes it's the same with COVID.
You can't predict who is going to get the severe illness.
This is a serious threat, no matter what your age.
Second, she focuses on kids. A major priority in Africa was preventing transmission to children. Birx takes the same approach with COVID.
Young people are getting infected and hospitalized.
And protecting kids requires shutting down the main hub of new infections: schools.
When the schools close, they prevent the transmission of all those respiratory diseases.
She had her hands on the controls of anything coming out of the CDC. If they gave guidance that said there's a likelihood that schools being open will further spread the virus, well, any superintendent's looking at that and saying, I ain't going to get sued.
Third, get to 0 cases at any cost.
You start with that 0, as we did with HIV, 0 new infections, 0 deaths.
I think our goal should be 0 hospitalizations and 0 deaths. I don't accept less. I am not a less acceptor.
And in March of 2020, all 50 states comply with the COVID's playbook, shutting down society.
We've issued the guidelines. Frankly, every state in America has embraced those guidelines at a minimum.
In May, concerns about COVIDs begin to bubble up from within the White House.
Tyler Goodspeed, and I was acting chair of the President's Council of Economic Advisors.
How frequently are you seeing the president?
So by summer 2020, I'm probably seeing the president once a week.
Are you sitting in meetings of the coronavirus task force?
Yes.
All of them?
Not all of them.
But a lot of them?
Well. And we were in a meeting in the Roosevelt Room with Dr. Birx and others. She said, so how's the economy doing? To which I said, not well. And her reaction was a deep sigh. We're getting, the biggest job loss in U.S. history, increased deaths of despair from 44 million Americans becoming unemployed, and the consequences of lost childhood learning.
The president himself starts openly questioning the lockdowns. He tweets, "Liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota, liberate Virginia."
We're not doing any more shutdowns. We did the shutdown, and now we're doing the opening, and there won't be any more shutdowns.
It was clear that the president wanted a broader base of advisors. Well, this is in AIDS and this is in Africa. I became the intermediary that set up a session with Scott and the president.
Scott Atlas, do you have any recollection as to where he popped up on your radar?
It was when Deb Burks asked me, so who is this guy that they're bringing in from the Hoover Institution?
Scott Atlas was one of the first people in the country to point out the obvious. Every case was not a killer.
It was obvious after 5 minutes that the numbers about the fatality rate were wrong. The infection fatality rate, according to the World Health Organization, of 3.4% means that more than 3 out of 100 people who get infected are going to die. That was not true. Certainly, people who were old, the infection fatality rate was very high. But for people under 70, was something like 0.05%, means that 99.95% of people are going to survive. I started to explain this to my own family, and my sons, who I like to believe are a lot smarter than I am, didn't understand what I was talking about. And I thought, okay, if they don't understand what's going on, that's frightening to me, because it's obvious that the infection fatality rate is much lower than what the WHO said. And so I started working on exposing the data about the pandemic.
Doctor, welcome back to the program. Good to have you.
Is Dr. Scott Atlas from the Hoover Institution.
Scott Atlas has thought a lot about this. Dr. Atlas, thanks so much.
COVID is very serious for a certain group of people. I was advocating increasing protection for the people who were at high risk. All the cases in nursing homes are coming in through the workers. You should be testing nursing workers every single day. That's increasing protection. The so-called experts on the task force, they didn't understand this at all. In July, I was called up by the personnel people in the White House.
We have a man with us who's a great expert. Maybe Scott Atlas, Dr. Scott Atlas, could say just a couple of words.
It's a great honor to be asked to help out in any way I can. There was an oval table with about 8 of us. Fauci did not have an official role in charge of anything on the task force. Birx was the one that wrote personally all of the official White House policy to every governor. She was an AIDS scientist. She somehow made this analogy between the two diseases. On the agenda would be risk to children in schools. Vice President Pence went around and said, so we're all in agreement, right? And so I said, okay, I totally disagree. The risk to children was known to be extremely minuscule, but it was very harmful to close schools. During the spring 2020 school closures alone, 300,000 cases of child abuse, they were not noticed because schools are the #1 agency where child abuse is reported. There was an explosion on suicidal ideation. 1 out of 4 college-age kids were thinking of killing themselves. There was silence, except for one statement by Birx. You're an outlier. I'm an outlier. There was no data to refute what I said. I tried to get the people actually doing the research on the pandemic to come in just to answer his questions. So I organized Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford, Joe Ladapo, who was at UCLA, Cody Meisner of Tufts University, and to join me and sit in the Oval Office and just simply answer the questions of the president.
And I remember the phone call from Scott, all excited when he finally got agreement that we could come.
This group of scientists rejects the push for 0 cases at any cost.
The argument I was making is that the collateral harms from the lockdowns were going to be so bad to the health of the population that they would far offset whatever lives would be saved by the lockdowns themselves.
And it was organized to allow Dr. Birx to attend with her schedule. Specifically, the day before the meeting, she sent an email to Jared Kushner and others saying she's not going to the meeting. It's bad for her.
So it's very flabbergasting that somebody would not want to have that conversation. Again, if you're a scientist, you want to hear different takes on things.
So I was called in to Jared Kushner's office. I was told, okay, the meeting's canceled. I said, no, that's unacceptable. He said, okay, we'll have the meeting, but it's going to be 5 minutes. Just a hello.
We were only supposed to meet for 5 minutes. But the president kept asking us questions.
Yeah, I think he had the sense that something was wrong. He wasn't necessarily getting the best advice.
And I was tapped on the shoulder. Okay, we got to break it up. And I said, okay, but I'm not going to interrupt the President of the United States.
If you have 3 senior epidemiologists, Stanford, Harvard, and you have Scott Atlas telling him that Debbie Birx has it completely wrong. There's no reason to do any of this stuff. Well, that you are sort of outgunned. Now, I'm not outvoiced. You just don't allow yourself to be outvoiced.
Legislative, executive, judicial. These are the 3 main branches of our federal government.
The standard story of American government goes like this. 3 branches: legislative, judicial, executive, each set up to check each other. This story is out of date. Your history books are lying to you. There's now a 4th branch, an administrative branch filled with the people that last between presidents. These are the people responsible for actually running the programs created by Congress. This is the permanent administrative class. Deborah Birx has worked in this 4th branch for decades, and she's thrived in it. And when she collides with a defiant president, she uses it to steal vast powers that were supposed to be his. And this is how a president gets played. First, Birx goes to Mike Pence and explicitly asks for permission to keep producing the guidelines.
I made it very clear to the vice president, and I said, you know, I'm saying exactly the opposite of what the president is saying and Scott Atlas is saying. And the vice president said, you do what you need to do.
Birx continues to write her regular guidance to the governors.
I just want you to grasp this. The White House with the White House emblem on it is sending this report to governors every week that says completely the opposite of what the president is saying. Despite the fact that Scott Atlas would say, well, the president's policy is, and I'm like, have the president tell me. I went to the communications leads and I said, you can't put Scott Atlas out. You know, I can't stop him from talking to the president, but I can stop him being on national news. And they said, okay.
I was told many times internally, Scott, stop talking. Stop speaking to the media about this. We have an election coming up. You're rocking the boat.
Pence then gives Birx permission to use Air Force Two to travel the country and reinforce her guidance in person.
Birx visited the states. Birx was the one that pushed the lockdowns, the closures of everything.
And at the exact same time Pence has unleashed a pure swamp creature on the country, he's promising the public this.
And it's going to take at least 4 more years to drain that swamp. Oh, we're draining it. Just like the president says, a little deeper than we thought it was. We're draining it, though. We found the plug. And we're going to pull it tomorrow.
Trump fails to stop Birx, and the staffers still loyal to him fail to even read what she's writing. Finally, someone notices what's happening.
So then they started finding them. They had someone actually read them. And so they would get back to me with these changes. But then I realized that they were skimming. So as long as I didn't start with close bars, decrease indoor dining, they missed it. I mean, yes, they asked me to water them down, but I didn't.
At the end of the year, COVIDs remains the official White House policy. Most governors continue to pursue 0 cases at any cost.
They destroyed everybody to stop cases of COVID, and it destroyed millions of people. That is the legacy of the Birx guidance.
And we have too many states that are locked down right now. The governors are, nobody knows what the governors are doing, actually.
Most states continue to focus on kids and shut down their schools.
We had an explosion of anxiety, depression in high school and college-age kids, explosion of drug abuse. That's all from school closures. That has absolutely nothing to do with the infection.
Get the kids back to school. We got to get the kids back to school.
Most states continue to treat COVID as an equal opportunity killer and fail to protect the high-risk elderly.
I was advocating personally for a marked increase in protecting the elderly. They failed to protect the elderly. Birx failed.
The disease Deborah Birx was fighting does not exist. You were forced to live a fiction, a state-sponsored religion. And this man was toppled without a shot fired, the victim of a casual coup. He can certainly perform the alpha man of action, but when he had power the first time, he let someone so slight just take it from him.
The cure cannot be worse than the problem itself. And that's what's happening. And he wants to close down, he'll close down the country if one person in our massive bureaucracy says we should close it down.
Vice President Biden, your response.
And this is just a piece of paper. It's a historical curiosity, an interesting artifact from the past. This isn't how power works in Washington. This is how this woman used the fourth branch to take down a president and flatten a country.